Hello and welcome to Star Diary, the podcast from the makers of BBC Sky at Night magazine. You can subscribe to the digital edition of the magazine by visiting iTunes, Google Play or Apple News, or to the print edition by visiting skyatnightmagazine.com.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome to Star Diary, a weekly guide to the best things to see in the Northern Hemisphere's night sky. As we are based here in the UK, all times are in BST. In this episode, we'll be covering the coming week from the 2nd to the 8th of September. I'm Ezzy Pearson, the magazine's features editor, and I'm joined today by astronomy writer Mary McIntyre. Hello, Mary.
Hi, Ezzy.
So, what do we have to look forward to in this week's night sky?
Oh, this week Mercury returns, which is great. It's going to be at its best morning show of the year. We've got some lunar pairings, a starry waterfall, and a moving star cluster. We'll get onto that later. So I'll start off with the planets. Venus is still very much lost in the evening twilight. It's setting about 40 minutes after the sun, so it's kind of even closer to the sun than it was last week. So you will need binoculars if you are going to see it. And as is so important, wait until after it is set before you try to look for it with binoculars. It's going to set at around about 7:45. So then just wait probably until about 8 o'clock and then try to find Venus, just to keep your eyes safe. Saturn is a much easier target. That is MAG plus 0.2. It actually reaches opposition on the 8th of September, so it's the end of this week. So it's well placed all month, visible all night long. Lies in Aquarius, is rising about 10 to 8 in the twilight, and then will remain visible all night long. So that's a great one to look for. Neptune also reaches opposition later this month on the 20th of September, so that also is visible all night and is well placed all month, in fact. So this is an important note with planets. When they come to opposition, you can observe them usually all that month and the month before. Usually it's not just a kind of one night thing. So you've got great opportunities all month to see Neptune or Saturn. Uranus is MAG plus 5.7 and that lies in Taurus and is rising about 10 to 10. So obviously Neptune and Uranus at those magnitudes, you will need optical aids to see them. Mars this week is MAG plus 0.6 and that is also in Taurus and is rising about 7:45. We've got a couple of conjunctions with Mars as well this week. On the 5th of September, Mars is just going to be just 8 arc minutes away from NGC 2129. And then the night after that, on the 6th of September, Mars is going to be 10 arc minutes from 1 Gemini. So a couple of close conjunctions there. Mercury is back. It reaches greatest western elongation on the 5th of September. It's going to be MAG minus 0.2, so it's pretty bright. Obviously, Mercury never gets particularly high, but it can be very bright. So if you have got a clear horizon, it's always worth having a look. This is going to be its best morning show of the year. It's located in Leo and is rising about 4:45 in the morning, which is nearly 2 hours before sunrise. So there's plenty of opportunity to see it before the sun actually rises. And on the 8th of September, it's going to be just 1.6 degrees northeast of Regulus. So it'd be good to see Mercury near the bright star Regulus. So yeah, it's great to have Mercury back. I've not seen it for a while, so that's awesome.
It completes the set.
Yes.
That's all. Well, I was about to say 8 planets, and then I realised there's only 7 that we can see unless you count Earth, which I suppose you can see. If you're not on Earth, then you've got some problems. At least unless you're an astronaut on the ISS, I suppose. But great opportunity to see all of them in one night.
Yeah, there are lots of opportunities for some more Jupiter fun and games with moon shadows. On the 2nd of September, Io is in transit as Jupiter rises, and that will leave the disk again at 20 past midnight. On the 3rd, the Great Red Spot is really well placed as Jupiter rises. So if you've never seen the Great Red Spot, that's a great time to have a look for that. Even just with a good pair of binoculars, you should be able to see that. 6th of September at 5 past midnight, again, the Great Red Spot is well placed. And then on the 7th of September, from 20 past 1 till 10 past 3, we've got a Ganymede transit. The 8th of September, we've got Io shadow transit, followed by Io itself transiting again. So there's just so many of these things that happen every week, not always necessarily visible from your location, but it's always worth just having a look online and seeing what other shadow transits are taking place from your location. There are also some moon transits on Saturn this week as well. On the 2nd of September at 10:03, Titan, which is Saturn's largest moon, that is actually going to be located immediately south of Saturn's south pole. So that'll be really good fun. And then 2 on the 3rd of September, Tethys and the shadow of Tethys will begin to transit on Saturn. And then at 3:15 in the morning, the Dione moon and shadow will also join them. So if you look at 4:22, all of these are going to be central to the disk of Saturn. So they'll be really easy to see. You'll see the shadows of both of them kind of central on the disk of the planet. So really good fun to look for shadow transits on Saturn as well as Jupiter. More of a challenge is Pluto, which still lies between Capricornus and Ophiuchus. It reaches its highest point at 14 degrees above the southern horizon at about 20 past 10 in the evening, and it sets at about 2:15. So it's mag plus 14, so it is a challenging object. You will need a telescope to see that.
Yeah, you probably want to be photographing it to really make sure you get it.
Yeah, photography technology means that it's easier to capture these things than it is to see them. So especially if your eyesight's like mine, as I get older, it gets worse. So I kind of rely on my camera more and more as I get older.
You can't change the exposure time on your eyes, unfortunately. At least not yet.
Not yet. Moving on to the moon, this week the moon is moving from new moon up to first quarter, so it's a great opportunity to look at all of those southern hemisphere craters that you can see so beautifully on a crescent moon and first quarter moon. On the 5th of September, the 6.4% waxing moon is left of Venus in the evening twilight. That's going to be a challenge, as we already discussed. Venus is a challenging object at the moment, but that will be a really good pairing through binoculars if you can seek those out. And on the 6th of September at 8 o'clock in the evening after sunset, the 11% moon is going to be just 29 arc minutes below Spica and 15 degrees left of Venus. So Venus will be nearby again that night, but we've got Spica in with the mix as well. So definitely good for looking for those. But yeah, definitely just point your binoculars at the moon this week, any night, and you'll be treated to a great display of southern hemisphere craters.
I do have to say I have a soft spot for any time you can see a crescent moon with a bright planet next to it. There's just something about that sight that just looks very beautiful to me.
Comet 13P Olbers is still very slowly moving through Comet Berenices, and this week slowly moves into Bootes. At 21:15, it's going to be 15 degrees above the western horizon, but it is only mag plus 9.6. So again, probably more of a photographic object, really. You'll definitely need optical aids to be able to see that. There's a couple of deep sky things to talk about. The first one, I know I mentioned this probably a couple of months or so ago, but it's Kemble's Cascade. And it's worth mentioning again because this month it's orientated so it's vertical. So the whole chain of stars is actually vertical. And it's called the Cascade because it looks like a waterfall and the star cluster at the bottom of it actually looked like a splash pool. So it's the perfect time to actually see it looking like the cascading waterfall that it was named after. It's actually located in Camelopardalis, which is a very faint constellation between Polaris and Capella. It's actually a triangle shape. So once you've found the shape of Camelopardalis, which is a giraffe, by the way, if you didn't know, it was one of the more modern named constellations. So there's no mythology about the giraffe, which is very disappointing. I feel like I should make some up because that'd be a fun time.
I just love the fact that the Latin name for a giraffe literally means camel leopard. Because people, like, how do you describe it? It looks like a camel, but it's got spots like a leopard. It's just a very say what you see way of calling things.
Yeah, I love the name Camelopardalis anyway. It's fun to say. But if you look at the bottom of that triangle, about 2/3 along the bottom edge, there is a fainter star. And that star is like really in the middle of that entire chain of stars. So with binoculars, even with like small 8x42s, you can easily see this cascade. It is absolutely gorgeous. One of my favourite binocular objects. And it's just a really good time to look at that. I also wanted to talk about the Alpha Persei moving cluster. So it is literally called the moving cluster. So this is a pretty extensive cluster. It covers 4 degrees of sky and it's within Perseus and it extends out from Merfak, which is Alpha Persei, the brightest star within Perseus. And this cluster contains lots of very young stars. So they're very blue and white. So they really just look so beautiful against the background sky. And when we say young stars, we mean they're about 50 million years old rather than several billion. So they're still old by human standards, but they're still relatively new. The reason that it's called the moving cluster is that these stars actually demonstrate proper motion. For the most part, when we look at stars, they do not change at all within our lifetime. They feel very fixed, and that's usually just because they're so far away. But the stars themselves are moving relative to each other, a tiny amount within a human lifetime. And this cluster does display proper motion, but it is a minuscule amount of movement. And I'm impressed that people were able to even spot this movement, and they've linked that all the stars within this cluster are moving the same amount. So they're obviously gravitationally linked, but they're moving such a tiny amount that I'm just like mind blown that they were even able to discover this movement in any way. So they move about 0.035 arc seconds per year. So that is a tiny amount. So within a human lifetime, that is only 2.45 arc seconds, which is really, really small amount of movement. But because they are moving, it's got the name the moving cluster. Just for comparison with the proper motion, Barnard star is one of the more well-known stars for displaying proper motion. And within a human lifetime, that basically moves about 1/4 of a degree, which is half the diameter of a full moon. So compared to how minuscule the amount of movement is in the Alpha Persei cluster, again, I'm just always really impressed that people were able to plot that and realize that they're all moving the same amount relative to each other. But if you study it over a really long period of time with a big telescope, you will see that the stars have moved their positions. So it's a beautiful cluster to observe. You are never going to see that kind of movement yourself with binoculars. You would need a big telescope and a very full lifetime of taking pictures to plot it. But I just love the fact that it's named the moving cluster, even though it kind of isn't really.
It's one of those things that when you start looking at how precise these measurements are, because I remember back when I was doing my degree, there was a joke about when you're measuring the distance to a star, the error bars were so big it could be half a light year in the other side of Earth, and that would still be an accurate measurement. Now there's these incredibly precise measurements that they can take of these things. And that's the other thing that people have been, because we're now getting to the stage of not only do we have the technology that can make these measurements, we've had it for long enough that we can have been making these measurements for 20 years. And that's what you need. And as time goes on and more of these like huge surveys start happening, we're going to start finding even more of these sorts of amazing measurements and finding out all kinds of weird things that we wouldn't be able to without lots of people working together over a long period of time.
It's a very exciting time, isn't it, for stuff like that? But I know quite a few amateur photographers that have kind of over the last decade taken pictures of stars like Barnard Star that actually do move, and they can show that movement, align the pictures and make an animation. And it's like mind blown that we are able to do that from our back gardens now. We're not going to see it actually moving tonight, so it's a bit clickbaity in my introduction, but it is such a beautiful cluster to kind of look at. So you can tell all your friends that you've looked at a moving star cluster and then explain. Finally, there are some really nice pre-dawn International Space Station passes all week this week. There are multiple per night. So if you've got a clear night and you're up really early, just make sure that you are looking out for the times that the space station will transit.
That sounds like there are some absolutely fascinating things to get to grips with in this week's night sky. Thank you very much, Mary, for taking us through all of them. And if our listeners at home would like to get even more stargazing highlights, do subscribe to the podcast and we'll be back here next week. But to summarise this week again, Venus is going to be up in the early evening sky. It's not the best planet to see at the moment. However, much better is going to be the planet Saturn, which will actually be reaching opposition on the 8th of September. Meanwhile, Neptune, Uranus, Mars and Jupiter will all be rising throughout the evening sky. And Mercury also will finally be visible in the morning sky as well. It'll put on its best show of the year on the 5th of September when it reaches greatest western elongation. Whilst you're out looking at the planets, you might want to take a closer look at Jupiter, which will have several moon transits, and the Great Red Spot will also be making an appearance throughout the week. Also, Saturn will have several moon transits as well, particularly on the 2nd and 3rd of September, so keep an eye out for those. The moon is moving from new to first quarter throughout the week. The crescent moon is going to be near to Venus just after sunset, so keep an eye out for that one. Comet 13P Olbers will be moving through Coma Berenice into Bootes throughout the week. It's also a great opportunity to see Kemble's Cascade in Camelopardalis, so take an opportunity to look at those cascading stars and star clusters throughout that region. You can also take a look at star cluster Alpha Persei, which is very, very slowly moving across the sky. You won't be able to perceive it this week, but you can get a glimpse of it, perhaps take a photo of it and come back in a couple of years' time and see if you can notice any differences. And finally, the ISS is continuing to make several great pre-dawn passes throughout the week, so keep an eye out for those. Look up if there's any happening in your local area as well. So lots of things to be seeing in the night sky, some near, some far, but hopefully you'll find something that will float your boat. And we'll see you back here next week. From all of us here at Sky Night Magazine, goodbye. If you want to find out even more spectacular sights that will be gracing the night sky this month, be sure to pick up a copy of BBC Sky at Night magazine, where we have a 16-page pull-out sky guide with a full overview of everything worth looking up for throughout the whole month. Whether you like to look at the moon, the planets, or the deep sky, whether you use binoculars, telescopes, or neither, our Sky Guide has got you covered, with detailed star charts to help you track your way across the night sky. From all of us here at BBC Sky at Night magazine, goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Star Diary podcast from the makers of BBC Sky at Night magazine, which was edited by Lewis Dobbs. For more of our podcasts, visit our website at skyatnightmagazine.com/podcasts or head to Spotify, iTunes, or your favourite podcast player.